Have you ever noticed how some people move through life with a kind of grace you can't quite name, while others, maybe people like you, maybe people like me, seem to be constantly running but never arriving anywhere that matters? Maybe you rush through breakfast because you're thinking about work. Maybe you skim through conversations because you're already planning the next thing. Or maybe you've lived so long and fast forward that you've forgotten what it feels like to truly be present in a single moment. If that sounds painfully familiar, if your life feels like a series of tasks to check off rather than experiences to savor, then I need you to stay with me. Because what I'm about to share is a story about a woman who was drowning in her own efficiency until one unexpected lesson, taught through nothing more complicated than flour, water, and time, showed her that the way she did everything was actually the reason she had nothing. In a city where everyone measures their worth by how much they accomplish before noon, there lived a 28-year-old woman named Elena who had turned productivity into an art form and efficiency into a religion that governed every waking hour of her carefully optimized existence. Elena worked as a project manager at a technology company, the kind of place where people respond to emails during dinner and consider sleep a negotiable luxury rather than a biological necessity. And she was exceptional at what she did because she had mastered the skill of doing 3 things simultaneously while already planning the 4th and 5th. Her mornings began at 5:30 with a workout video playing at 1.5 speed while she mentally rehearsed her first meeting. Her breakfast was a protein shake consumed while answering messages, and her commute was a strategic opportunity to listen to podcasts at double speed because, as she often said, normal pace felt like watching paint dry when you understood that time was the only resource you could never earn back. When colleagues asked her to lunch, she brought her laptop because sitting without working felt wasteful, like leaving money on the table or letting food spoil in the refrigerator. When friends invited her to dinner parties, she arrived exactly on time and left within 90 minutes because she had already allocated the next time block to another commitment that seemed equally important in the grand optimization scheme of her life. She read books by skimming the summaries. She watched movies only if they were educational documentaries that could enhance her professional knowledge. And she had learned to grocery shop in precisely 14 minutes by following a route she had mapped with the efficiency of a military operation. People admired Elena's discipline, her focus, her ability to accomplish in one day what took others a week. But what they didn't see, what Elena herself had stopped noticing, was that somewhere in all that relentless forward motion, she had lost the ability to simply be anywhere without simultaneously trying to be somewhere else. Her sister Maya, who was 3 years younger and worked as an elementary school teacher, would sometimes watch Elena with a sadness that looked almost like mourning and say things like, "You know, life isn't a race you win by crossing the most finish lines." But Elena would smile that efficient smile she had perfected and respond with something about maximizing potential or not wasting opportunities, words that sounded wise but felt hollow even as they left her mouth. At night, alone in her perfectly organized apartment, where everything had its designated place and her calendar was color-coded 3 months in advance, Elena would sometimes feel a strange emptiness that she couldn't quite name. A sensation like hunger, but not for food, like loneliness, but not exactly for people, more like a deep, aching awareness that she was sprinting through a life she had forgotten to actually live. The breaking point came on her 29th birthday, a day that should have been a celebration, but instead became the moment when Elena's carefully constructed efficiency machine finally ground to a halt in the most devastating way possible. Her company had thrown her a surprise party, one of those mandatory celebrations where everyone gathers around a conference table with supermarket cake and rehearsed enthusiasm. And Elena stood there surrounded by colleagues who knew her professional achievements, but couldn't name a single thing she cared about beyond quarterly targets and project deadlines. And the realization hit her with the force of a physical blow that she had spent nearly 3 decades becoming incredibly good at doing things while forgetting entirely how to care about anything. Someone made a toast about her dedication and work ethic. Someone else mentioned how she never missed a deadline. And the whole time, Elena felt like she was watching the scene from outside her own body, observing a stranger being praised for qualities that suddenly seemed less like virtues and more like symptoms of a disease she hadn't known she was suffering from. That night, at 3 o'clock in the morning, when the city was finally quiet enough that she couldn't drown out her own thoughts with productivity and planning, Elena sat on her kitchen floor with her laptop open to her meticulously organized task management system. Hundreds of completed items, thousands of hours accounted for, years of optimization documented, and she couldn't remember a single moment from any of it that had made her genuinely happy. Her chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, like she was drowning in air. And for the first time in her adult life, Elena experienced what her therapist would later call a panic attack, but what felt in that moment like her body's desperate attempt to make her stop, to force her to finally pay attention to what all that efficiency had cost her. She called her sister Maya at 3:15 in the morning, her voice shaking in a way she hadn't allowed it to shake since she was a child. And Maya answered on the second ring with the kind of immediate presence that only comes from people who haven't trained themselves to be elsewhere, even when they're right where they are. "I don't know how to stop," Elena whispered into the phone, and Maya was quiet for a long moment before saying something that would change everything. "Then maybe you need to learn from someone who never learned to rush in the first place. Come with me tomorrow morning. There's someone I want you to meet." The next morning, before the city had shaken off sleep and resumed its frantic pace, Maya took Elena to a small bakery tucked into a side street that Elena had probably passed 1,000 times without ever truly seeing it. The kind of place that existed outside the logic of efficiency and productivity, where an elderly woman named Rosa had been baking bread the same way for 47 years. Grandma Rosa, as everyone in the neighborhood called her, was perhaps 75 years old, with hands that bore the map of decades spent working with flour and fire. And when Maya introduced Elena, those weathered eyes seemed to see through all the armor of optimization and straight into the frightened, exhausted person hiding beneath. "Your sister tells me you've forgotten how to do one thing at a time," Grandma Rosa said in a voice that carried the gentle weight of someone who had learned patience not from books, but from bread. And before Elena could construct one of her efficient explanations, the old woman placed a ball of dough in her hands and said, "Then we start with this." The dough was warm and alive in a way that nothing in Elena's digital, optimized world had ever been, and Grandma Rosa demonstrated the motion, not quickly, not efficiently, but with a kind of meditative completeness that treated each fold and press as if it were the only thing in the world that mattered at that precise moment. "Bread cannot be rushed," she explained, while her hands moved with the practiced grace of someone who had made this exact motion 10,000 times and still approached it with fresh attention. Because yeast doesn't care about your schedule or your productivity targets or how many other things you think you should be doing. It rises according to its own time, and if you try to hurry it, you don't get bread faster. You just get bread that never becomes what it was meant to be. Elena tried to knead the dough while mentally calculating how long this would take and what she was missing by being here. Her hands moving with the same rushed efficiency she brought to everything else. And within 30 seconds, Grandma Rosa gently stopped her and said something that would echo in Elena's mind for months afterward. "You're not here," she said simply, placing her warm, flour-dusted hand over Elena's restless ones. "Your hands are moving, but you're already gone, planning the next thing, measuring the time, judging whether this is worth it. And because you're not truly here, you're not really doing anything at all. You're just performing the motion while your mind is somewhere else entirely." Elena felt something crack open inside her chest, not painfully, but like a window that had been sealed shut for so long she'd forgotten windows could open. And she looked down at the dough that was already beginning to dry out from her rushed, absent handling. How you do one thing is how you do everything, Grandma Rosa continued, her voice carrying the kind of truth that can only be learned through years of repetition and presence. And right now, you do everything like someone running from a fire, quickly, desperately, never stopping long enough to notice if there's actually a fire behind you, or if you just got so used to running that you forgot how to stand still. She gestured to the rows of bread cooling on racks behind her, each loaf golden and perfect in its own slightly irregular way. Proof that something made with complete attention, even something as simple as bread, carries a quality that rushed perfection can never achieve. For 47 years, I have made bread exactly the same way. I measure the ingredients with care. I knead the dough until my hands know it's ready rather than until a timer tells me time is up. I let it rise for as long as it needs, regardless of whether that's convenient, and I bake it with the kind of attention you would give to a conversation with someone you love, she explained, while Elena listened with the desperate intensity of someone who had just discovered they'd been starving without knowing it. "This is not inefficient," Grandma Rosa said firmly, reading the question in Elena's eyes before she could voice it. "This is the only way anything worth having gets made. You cannot rush growth. You cannot optimize presence. You cannot be in two places at once and expect to fully be in either one. Because attention, real attention, is not something you can divide without losing exactly what makes it valuable." She handed Elena a fresh ball of dough and said, "For the next 30 days, I want you to come here every morning before work and knead bread with me. And the only rule is this: while your hands are in the dough, that is the only thing you are doing. Not planning, not optimizing, not thinking about what comes next. Just being completely, entirely present in this one simple task." The first morning, Elena lasted maybe 45 seconds before her mind started cataloging everything she should be doing instead, her efficient brain screaming that this was wasted time, that she could be answering emails or planning projects or doing literally anything more productive than standing in a quiet bakery pushing dough around with her hands while the world moved forward without her. But she came back the next morning anyway, and the morning after that, because Maya picked her up each time, and because Grandma Rosa never asked why she was there or congratulated her for showing up. She simply set out the dough and began her own work with that same patient, complete presence that made the entire world seem to slow down to match her rhythm. By day 7, Elena could manage 3 full minutes of pure attention before her mind wandered to her task list, and Grandma Rosa simply smiled, that knowing smile of someone who had watched this transformation happen before and said nothing about progress or goals, just continued kneading her own dough with the serene focus of someone who understood that some things cannot be rushed. By day 14, something shifted in Elena's body. Her shoulders dropped away from her ears where they'd been permanently tensed for years. Her breathing deepened without her consciously choosing it, and she noticed for the first time that the bakery smelled like warmth and yeast and possibility. Scents she had probably passed through 1,000 times without ever actually experiencing them. The changes started small and spread like yeast through dough, transforming everything they touched in ways Elena couldn't have predicted or controlled even if she'd tried. At work, she began closing her laptop during meetings to actually listen to what people were saying, rather than just waiting for her turn to speak while drafting her next email in her head. And she noticed that conversations became richer, that people shared things they'd never mentioned before when they felt truly heard instead of merely processed. When her sister called, Elena put down her phone instead of multitasking through the conversation. And Maya cried a little the first time Elena asked a follow-up question that proved she'd been genuinely listening rather than just waiting for a polite moment to end the call and return to whatever she'd been doing. By day 23, Elena found herself arriving at the bakery 5 minutes early, just to stand in the quiet space before the work began. Not because she was early for the sake of efficiency, but because she had discovered that she actually wanted to be there, that these moments of complete presence had become the most valuable part of her day in ways that had nothing to do with productivity or optimization. She learned to recognize when the dough had been kneaded enough, not by timing it, but by feeling it, by developing a relationship with the material that required attention and presence rather than measurement and control. And this shift from external metrics to internal knowing began to transform how she approached everything else in her life. On day 29, while her hands moved through the now familiar rhythm of folding and pressing, Elena realized with startling clarity that this was the first thing she had done in years, maybe ever, that had no purpose beyond itself, no metric for success, no way to fail or win, just the simple, complete act of being present with flour and water and time. And paradoxically, this thing that served no productive purpose had become the foundation on which everything else in her life was slowly being rebuilt. On the 30th morning, Grandma Rosa placed a perfect loaf of bread in Elena's hands, not perfect because it was flawless, but perfect because Elena had made it with complete attention, every fold and rest and rise done with the kind of presence that cannot be rushed or optimized or divided. And the old woman looked at her with eyes that held both pride and recognition. "You came here thinking I would teach you to slow down," Grandma Rosa said while wrapping the warm bread in paper. "But that's not what happened. I didn't teach you to be slow. I taught you to be present, and there's a difference that most people never learn, because presence isn't about speed. It's about completeness. It's about being entirely in one place rather than scattered across 20. Elena understood then what these 30 mornings had actually been teaching her. Why Grandma Rosa had insisted on the daily practice rather than a single lesson or a weekend workshop. Because the truth that changes lives cannot be learned intellectually or implemented like a productivity hack. It has to be practiced repeatedly until it becomes not something you do, but something you are. "How you do one thing is how you do everything," the old woman said, echoing the words that had first cracked Elena open weeks ago. And for 30 days, you practiced doing one thing with complete attention, which means you were practicing a way of being that you can now bring to everything else. Not because I told you to, but because your body and mind now know what presence feels like, and once you know that, you can never fully go back to living scattered and rushed without feeling the cost. My friend, if you're watching this while doing 3 other things, if you're already thinking about what you'll watch next before this video even ends, if you've spent so long optimizing your life that you've forgotten what it feels like to simply be present in a single moment, then I want you to hear this truth that changed Elena's life and might just change yours. You are not behind. You are not wasting time. You are not failing by choosing to do one thing completely rather than 10 things partially, because the quality of your attention determines the quality of your life far more than the quantity of your accomplishments. And presence, real, full, undivided presence, is not a luxury you can afford after you've achieved everything on your list. It is the foundation without which nothing you achieve will ever feel like enough. So here is what I'm asking you to do, not as another task to optimize or achievement to check off, but as a practice that might teach you what it means to actually be alive instead of just productive. Choose one simple, ordinary thing you do every day. Making coffee, washing dishes, walking to your car, folding laundry, anything that you currently rush through while thinking about something else. And for the next 7 days, do that one thing with your complete attention. Not because it matters more than other things, not because you're trying to become better at coffee making or dishwashing, but because you're practicing presence. You're training yourself to be entirely somewhere instead of nowhere. You're learning what it feels like to do one thing as if it's the only thing that exists for those particular moments. Notice how it feels when your mind wanders to your task list, and instead of judging yourself or forcing concentration, simply return your attention gently to the warmth of the water, the smell of the coffee, the texture of the cloth, whatever is actually here in this moment, rather than in the imagined future, where you think life is waiting for you to finish everything before it can begin. If this story touched something in you, if you recognized yourself in Elena's efficient rushing, or felt the weight of her realization that she'd been everywhere except where she actually was, then share it with someone who's drowning in productivity. Send it to a friend who's forgotten how to be present, or simply save it for yourself to watch again when you need the reminder that life is not a race to be won, but a series of moments to be lived. And if you feel moved to share what you'll practice being present with for these 7 days, I'd love to hear about it in the comments, not so we can compare or compete, but so we can remind each other that we're not alone in learning to come back to the only place we can ever actually be, which is right here, right now, completely and entirely in this one unrepeatable moment. Because the truth that bread teaches, that Grandma Rosa knew, that Elena learned through 30 mornings of practice, is beautifully simple and impossibly hard. How you do one thing is how you do everything. And if you do everything while trying to be somewhere else, you end up living a whole life without ever really being alive. Choose presence, practice attention, be here now.